She stood by my mother's casket and said there was no will. That is the first lie she told right in front of everyone, while pretending to cry. I watched her move into the house the next day, watched her wear mama's pearls, toss my baby photos like trash. I didn't say a word. Because I had something she didn't, the only signed, notarized copy of the will, locked in a bank safe she didn't even know existed. She thought I was grieving, but I was waiting. And when the truth hit her in court, she couldn't breathe. My name is Natalie Pierce. I live in Salem, Oregon. And 3 weeks ago, I buried my mother. Her name was Evelyn. She was quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who'd press your hand gently when she had something to say. She never raised her voice, but she never forgot a betrayal either. My mother had cancer. And when the doctors told us it was terminal, she called me into her bedroom one night, a room that always smelled like lavender and lemon tea, and handed me a folded piece of paper. "This is the will," she said. "We'll have it notarized tomorrow." I read it. It was simple. Everything the house, the jewelry, even her old piano was to go to me. Because I took care of her. Because I never left. Because I was her daughter in every way that counted. My Aunt Margaret didn't like that. Margaret was my mother's older sister, a bitter woman, always dressed too well for people she looked down on. She'd show up once every 6 months with wine and gossip, smile for a photo, and disappear again. She wasn't there for the surgeries, not when Mom lost her hair, not when she needed help using the bathroom, but she was there at the funeral. Standing right by the casket, wearing a black coat with gold buttons, and tears that didn't match the smirk hiding beneath them. And that S when she said it. In front of everyone, in front of the neighbors, the pastor, my cousins, my friends, she said, with fake sadness and practiced regret. There was no will. My sister never made one. She told me she wanted me to have the house, to keep it in the family. And just like that, everyone turned to look at me, like I was the crazy one, like I was some distant niece trying to claim something that didn't belong to me. Like I hadn't fed my mother soup at 2 a.m. when she couldn't sleep. I remember the cold wind slicing across the cemetery. I remember gripping the folded program in my hand until it tore. I remember looking Margaret in the eye and saying nothing. Because I already knew. I had the only legal copy of that will, signed, witnessed, notarized, and locked away in a safe deposit box 2 cities away, at a branch she'd never think to search. But I wasn't ready to use it, not yet. Let her believe her own performance. Let her taste the illusion of victory. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is silent. The next day, I came back to the house to pick up a photo album, the one with Mom's baby pictures. Margaret was already there. She'd changed the locks. She said, "This isn't your house anymore. Natalie." I didn't argue. I just walked away. She had no idea what was coming. That night, I sat on my bed, holding the spare key to the safe deposit box. I stared at the name on the envelope inside my name, typed in bold on the first line of the will. And I whispered to the room, "She thinks this is over." But it was just the beginning. Margaret wasted no time. The morning after the funeral, she changed the mailbox name to hers. By noon, she had movers hauling boxes into the house like it was always hers to begin with. I watched from across the street. It was raining. Of course it was. A Salem drizzle. Soft and gray, the kind that makes you feel like even the sky knows something's wrong. I had grown up in that house. I knew every creaky floorboard, every drawer that stuck, every place Mom hid candy when I was a kid. It wasn't just a building. It was the last piece of her I had left. And now Margaret was walking through it like it was some vacation property she just acquired. She wore her usual perfume, that overpowering lilac cloud that made you sneeze just by standing near her. She opened windows, threw out curtains, tossed out my mother as old knitting supplies like garbage. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because screaming doesn't win battles. Silence does. Planning does. That same day, I got a notice from the probate court. Margaret had filed a motion to be named executor of my mother's estate, Without a will or so, she claimed the estate was now up for grabs. I didn't reply, not yet. Instead, I called Mr. Harris, the attorney who helped us draft the will. He was retired now, living in Bend, Oregon, growing tomatoes in his backyard. But he remembered us clearly. Your mother was a meticulous woman, he said. She made sure everything was signed, sealed, and stored the right way. I asked him if he had kept a digital copy. He had, but it was a scan, not valid on its own. What mattered was the signed original, the notarized version, the one sitting in a safe deposit box inside the U.S. bank branch in Eugene. A 2-hour drive away, I made the trip the next morning. The banker greeted me by name. She opened the vault with a key and code, then left me alone. Inside that narrow room, I pulled out the small black box with my name etched on the top. Inside was the envelope, thick, sealed, untouched. I opened it with care. There it was, my Mother S. handwriting, her signature, the notary stamp, the 2 witnesses, the date, the full will, naming me as sole heir, not Margaret, not anyone else, just me. I made 3 certified copies, paid extra for official notarized duplicates. Then I placed everything back in the box, locked it, and walked out of that bank with a fire in my chest. Let her redecorate. Let her act like queen of the castle. She was digging her own grave. Over the next week, she had a garage sale, sold Mama's antique jewelry, sold the upright piano, sold my father's old typewriter. She even sold the watercolor paintings my mom had done in her final months, paintings that still had her initials in the corner. Neighbors came and went. They assumed Margaret had the right. Why wouldn't they? She was in the house. She had the keys. She smiled and laughed and told them she was handling the estate. No one questioned her. But I took pictures. I documented everything. I saved receipts, auction listings, Craigslist ads, and even Facebook posts she made bragging about the fresh start. She didn't know I was watching. That was her first mistake. I didn't sleep much. Most nights I sat with a cup of tea, my laptop open, building a file, every document, every timeline, every quote she ever made. I even hired a probate lawyer named Tessa Monroe, sharp, brilliant, and ruthless when needed. When Tessa saw the will, she blinked once and said, "We were going to court, and we were going to burn her story to the ground." We filed the challenge that Friday. We had the legal copy of the will. We had evidence of fraud. And we had one hell of a timeline. The court hearing was set for 3 weeks later. 3 weeks for her to keep pretending. 3 weeks for her to believe she'd won. And I let her. I smiled when people told me how kind Margaret was being. I nodded when someone said, "She must be so exhausted handling all the details." I said nothing, not because I was weak, but because I knew. Truth is heavy, and when it drops, it shatters lies like glass. 3 days before the hearing, Margaret posted a photo of herself in the backyard, the one Mom planted roses in. She captioned it, "Finally, home." I saved the image. Then I closed my laptop, and for the first time in weeks, I slept like a stone. The courthouse smelled like paper and old air. I stood in the hallway, file in hand, heart beating louder than the morning traffic outside. It was finally time. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of letting her parade around like the queen of someone else's kingdom. Today, I would speak, but I wouldn't raise my voice. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to land. Tessa Monroe met me on the courthouse steps. She looked like she'd stepped out of a legal drama sleek navy suit, red folder under one arm, hair tied back tight. She smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was sharp, like she already knew the outcome. "You ready?" she asked. "Been ready since the funeral," I said. Courtroom 2B was small. One judge, no jury, just a probate dispute, they called it. But to me, it was war. Margaret sat on the other side of the aisle. She wore black again, like grief was still her costume. Her lawyer was a man named Connor Beck. He looked annoyed to be there. Probably thought this would be quick. She didn't look at me when I walked in, but I looked at her, and I saw something flicker. Not fear, not yet, but doubt. Judge Marshall took the bench. He was older, stern, a man who'd seen too many lies. He asked both parties to introduce themselves. Tessa stood, clear, calm, deadly. Your Honor, she began. We are here today because my client, Ms. Natalie Pierce, is the sole legal heir to Evelyn Pierce's estate. We have in possession the original notarized last will and testament, signed and dated. There was a moment of silence. Then Connor Beck scoffed. We have seen no such document. As far as we are aware, no will exists. My client acted in good faith. Tessa opened her folder and handed copies to the clerk. The judge received a sealed copy directly. And then we watched his face as his eyes moved across the page, as his expression shifted from professional boredom to interest, then to something closer to surprise. He looked up. This appears valid, he said. Filed with a notary, 2 witnesses, signatures match, all in order. Margaret S. lips parted slightly. I saw her grip the armrest. Your Honor, she started, but he raised a hand. You said no will existed. This will clearly contradict that. Connor tried to recover, claimed we forged it, that I had coerced my mother. Tessa didn't flinch. She pulled out another file, a video, one I had almost forgotten. In the video, my mother sits at her dining table. She is thin, but her voice is clear. She says, on camera, I am signing this of my own free will. Everything I own is to go to Natalie. The date and timestamp are visible. The notary is on screen. One of the witnesses nods in the background. We played the video in silence. Margaret stared at the screen. She blinked rapidly. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. The judge leaned forward. Do you have any documentation that disputes this video or the will itself? Connor shook his head. Margaret looked away. Her silence was all the court needed. Judge Marshall cleared his throat. In light of this evidence, the court recognizes the submitted document as the valid last will and testament of Evelyn Pierce. All previously assumed authority by Ms. Margaret Ellis is hereby revoked. That was it. The ruling. But it wasn't to the end. Tessa stood again. Your Honor, we'd like to submit evidence of unauthorized sale of estate assets. Jewelry, furniture, artwork. We request that restitution be made or that legal consequences be enforced for misappropriation. She submitted a thick packet, receipts, screenshots, social media posts. Every lie Margaret had spun, printed, time-stamped, and indexed. Connor looked pale. Margaret whispered something to him. He shook his head. The judge flipped through the pages. Then he looked directly at Margaret. You've acted in direct contradiction to the law, he said. At minimum, the court will require full financial restitution. At worst, you may be looking at civil penalties. She didn't speak, didn't argue. For the first time since my mother died, she was silent. And I sat there, still, not gloating, just breathing, deep, steady, real. When the hearing adjourned, people began to leave. I stayed seated. Tessa placed a hand on my shoulder. You did good, she said. But I wasn't thinking about me. I was thinking about my mother, and how she used to say truth always finds a way. Natalie, even if it has to crawl through fire. Outside, the sky had cleared. For the first time in days, the sun lit up the marble steps of the courthouse, and as I walked down them, file still in hand, I didn't feel anger, or even pride. I felt peace. Because justice wasn't loud. It was quiet, precise, and absolute. After court, Margaret didn't say a word, not to me, not to the reporters outside, not even to her lawyer. She walked out of the courthouse like a woman unraveling, like she couldn't believe the stage lights had finally gone out. I watched her get into the back of a black car, the same one she had rented to look important. But even tinted windows couldn't hide the way her hands trembled. I went home. And for the first time since Mom died, I opened the front door of the house. My house. And I didn't need a key. Someone else had changed. This time, I had the real deed. In my name. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was clean, honest, mine. Margaret had left things behind. Half-packed boxes, a scarf still hanging on the coat rack, even a bottle of perfume, still half full, sitting on Mom's dresser like a ghost. I didn't touch any of it. I walked through each room slowly, every corner remembered, every wall still carrying the weight of memory. I found my mother's old apron, folded neatly in a drawer. I held it for a long time. Then I called a locksmith. New locks, new codes, new beginning. The court-s order arrived 2 days later. Margaret was required to return any unsold belongings. What she had already sold, she owed restitution. Nearly $58,000 worth. Her bank accounts were frozen, her assets temporarily seized, and her reputation shattered. The neighbors stopped waving at her. Even the woman from her church group, who once called Margaret a pillar of strength, left a comment on her Facebook post. How could you? Margaret deleted her profile 3 hours later. The estate agents who bought my mom's paintings reached out. They offered to return them, some for free, some I had to buy back. I didn't care. Each canvas mattered. Each one had her initials. Each one carried part of her soul. I repainted the living room walls, put her piano back where it used to be, hung her favorite photograph us at the coast, wind in our hair, smiles unforced. Little by little, the house became hers again, and through that, it became mine. One morning, I got a letter from Margaret S. attorney. She wanted to apologize, not in court, not in person, just a typed letter signed at the bottom, with the emotion of a receipt. She wrote, I acted based on my understanding of family duty. I regret any confusion caused. Confusion. She called it confusion. She stood in front of my mother's casket and lied. She sold memories for profit, and now she wanted to clean the blood with legal paper. I didn't reply. I folded the letter and placed it in the fireplace, watched the flame curl every false word into ash. Later that week, I walked to the garden. The roses had overgrown. My mom used to prune them every Sunday, humming hymns. Now they stood wild, beautiful, but aching for care. I wore her gloves, and for 3 hours I worked in silence, cutting, watering, pulling weeds from the roots. It was the most peaceful I had felt in months. I thought about how Margaret once said Natalie S. not strong enough for real life. She hides behind books and flowers. But flowers live longer than lies, and books carry truth when people want it. 2 weeks later, the sheriff's department delivered a notice. Margaret S. restitution was overdue. Her lawyer asked for an extension. The court denied it. Within days, her second home in Bend was listed for sale, a Lexus she had posted about just a month ago, gone repossession, all to pay back what she stole. Some people call that karma. I call it arithmetic. What you subtract from others will be subtracted from you. I never spoke to Margaret again. But I heard things. How she tried to move to California. How her friends stopped answering her calls. How she cried at the bank when they denied her withdrawal. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just kept rebuilding. Every corner of the house, every room she had touched, I erased her fingerprints and replaced them with legacy. The day I finished the last room Mom's old studio, I lit a candle by the window. The sun hit the glass just right. And for a moment, the flame flickered in perfect stillness. I whispered, "It is done, Mom." And I swear I heard the wind say finally. I never saw her again. Not in person, not in court, not on the street or in any of the places she once walked like she owned them. Margaret vanished like smoke when the fire dies, not with a bang, but with the silence of someone who knows they've lost everything. The house was mine now, but it wasn't about the house anymore. It never really was. It was about the truth. It was about my mother's name not being twisted into a lie. It was about memory, about love, about legacy. The kind that doesn't come with a key, but with a promise. I remember the night before Mom passed. She took my hand, eyes tired but still bright, and she whispered, "Don T fight fire with fire. Natalie, Win with proof. Win with peace. So I did. I didn't yell. I didn't post anything online. I didn't tell the neighbors how wrong they were when they believed Margaret. I just waited. And then I acted. I spent the next month rebuilding quietly. The garden was alive again. The studio had light. The house had warmth. I framed the will, not to brag, but to remember. It sat in a modest frame on the bookshelf next to photos of Mom and a candle I never let go out. One afternoon, a neighbor came by, Mrs. Delaney. She used to bring over banana bread every fall. She looked nervous, held a small box in her hands. "I found this," she said. "Margaret gave it to me to sell. I didn't know it was your mom's." Inside was my Mother S. locket, gold, oval, with a photo of me as a child on one side and Mom S. wedding portrait on the other. I took it gently, and I thanked her. Not just for returning it, but for having the courage to do so. Word spread slowly in towns like ours. At first, people avoided me, not out of malice, but guilt. They believed the louder voice. They ignored the quiet truth. But truth has gravity, and eventually, everything falls back into orbit around it. I started receiving letters, condolences, regrets, even apologies. I read everyone. Then I tucked them into a drawer. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means no longer giving energy to what S already dead. One morning, I stood in the living room holding a photo of my mom. I said aloud, "I kept my promise, and for the first time, I didn't cry." I smiled. I got a job offer from a local museum. They'd seen some of my late Mom S work that I had restored and shared quietly through a friend. They wanted to feature a few of her pieces. I agreed, not because I wanted attention, but because her story deserved to live longer than her body. At the opening night, I stood in the back. People admired her work. They spoke of color and feeling and legacy. No one mentioned Margaret, because no one remembered her anymore. When you build your life on lies, you leave nothing behind when the lies collapse. Not even dust. But when you live in truth quiet, patient, unwavering, you leave echoes. Strong enough for generations. Sometimes, when I sit on the porch in the evening, I think of how different things could be gone. How easy it would have been to scream at Margaret at the funeral, to force my way into the house, to burn it all down. But fire only feeds itself. It doesn't build anything new. I built, I rebuilt, and I rose, silently, powerfully. That is the revenge she never saw coming. Not because it was hidden, but because she never believed silence could be that loud. So no, I never saw her again. But I didn't need to. She lives with the weight of her own choices. And I live in peace, in truth, in the home my mother gave me, legally, rightfully, and with love that no lie could ever erase.